Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today we are tackling Cal Newport's Deep Work. And I gotta say, that subtitle, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. I mean, how timely is that? We are all, it feels like, just fighting for focus these days.
It really does.
So we're going to extract most actionable insights from this book, really dig into them to help us reclaim our attention and produce our best work. And to guide us through this deep dive, we have an expert who's really dug into the nuances of deep work and its practical application.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to dive in here with you.
Oh, sure.
It is fascinating to look at this almost ironic situation, I think, that Newport points out, which is that deep work, this intense, focused kind of work, is becoming incredibly valuable in our knowledge economy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, more and more rare.
It's almost like a paradox. You know, he talks about the sea of shallow work that we're swimming in.
Right.
All those emails, all those meetings, the constant, just barrage of notifications.
Yeah.
It feels productive, but is it really?
Right. And it creates this illusion of business.
Yeah.
But often doesn't result in truly meaningful output.
Right.
And Newport even points out that in many knowledge work jobs, it's hard to even measure true productivity.
Yay.
So looking busy becomes a kind of defense mechanism.
Yeah. So how does Newport actually define deep work? Because I think sometimes when we talk about, focus and productivity, it just becomes this idea of like, put your phone away, just don't go on Twitter.
Right.
But there's more to it than that, right?
It's not about, just disconnecting from the internet entirely.
Right.
Deep work for Newport is about applying focused, undistracted attention to cognitively demanding tasks.
Okay.
So think of it like this. You're training your mental muscles, building skills, and producing things of real value.
And you're not going to be able to scroll your way to that. Right.
Exactly.
It has to be something that is actually demanding of your brain.
Yeah. And he even uses the example of himself. So he has published 4 books, earned a PhD, and secured a tenure track position at Georgetown. And he says he rarely works past 5 or 6 p.m.
That's a pretty compressed work schedule.
Yeah, he attributes that to his deep work habits.
Hmm.
And it's not just him. He also mentions Jason Ben, who went from struggling in a distracting finance job to excelling as a programmer at a San Francisco startup and retraining his mind to focus.
So this is something that anybody can do. It's not like some people are just born with this ability.
Right, yeah. Jason Ben even locked himself in a room with no computer to learn programming. He would just use textbooks and note cards.
Wow, that's commitment.
Yeah.
But I think it speaks to that idea that this is something you build. It's a skill.
Yeah. That's
like learning anything, really.
Yeah. And it's not just individual productivity. We can even think about the societal angle. Think of someone like Nate Silver using data analysis to make incredibly accurate predictions in elections.
Yeah.
That's deep work in action, right?
Yeah.
Mastering complex skills requiring intense focus and then using those skills to produce something uniquely valuable.
It's like the difference between knowing how to use a hammer versus being a master craftsman.
Right.
Building these beautiful, intricate pieces of furniture.
That's a great analogy. And that brings us to another crucial point, I think.
Yeah.
It's not just churning out work.
Right.
Deep work is about finding meaning in what you do.
Yeah. He draws on the philosophers Dreyfus and Kelly
Right.
to argue that deep work helps us cultivate craftsmanship in our professions.
Yeah.
And he uses the example of Rick Furr, who's this master blacksmith. He spends hours meticulously crafting these Viking-era swords.
Yeah.
Obviously, the man does not need another sword.
He doesn't need another sword.
But it's about the process, right?
It's about the process.
And that's what brings him satisfaction.
Yeah. It's about finding that sense of sacredness, of creating something truly meaningful in the work you do. And what's fascinating is that this connection between deep work and meaning isn't just philosophical, it's neurological as well. When we're deeply focused, we enter a state of flow where we kind of lose track of time. We become fully absorbed in what we're doing.
Right.
And those flow states aren't just enjoyable, they're linked to greater happiness and life satisfaction. Plus, deep work forces us to really grapple with complex problems, to come up with creative solutions.
Right. It's like you're using your brain to its fullest capacity, which I think is something that's fulfilling in itself.
Exactly. It pushes us to think critically and to use our full cognitive capacity, which aligns perfectly with the human brain's, I think, desire for meaning and purpose.
Yeah. Okay, so deep work is valuable, it's meaningful, that's something that we can develop. But how do we actually make it happen? Because I think that's the question that a lot of people get stuck on. It sounds great in theory, but in practice. this?
Right.
How do we do this? And one of the things Newport does is he outlines 4 distinct deep work philosophies.
Right.
He calls them the monastic, the bimodal, the rhythmic, and the journalistic.
Right. And they're more than just labels. They offer practical frameworks for how to integrate deep work into your life.
I am intrigued. Let's unpack these philosophies a bit more.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's start with the most intense sounding one, the monastic.
Yeah.
What is that all about?
The monastic approach is about minimizing distractions to an almost extreme degree. So think about a writer retreating to a secluded cabin for months to finish a manuscript.
Right.
Newport gives the example of Neil Stephenson, the science fiction author, who famously avoids email and makes himself very difficult to contact.
Yeah. I mean, that works for a certain type of work, certain type of person maybe.
Right.
But I feel like for a lot of people, especially if you have, a job where you need to interact with others, that's not really sustainable.
That's where the bimodal philosophy comes in. It's about alternating between periods of intense distraction-free work and then periods of more normal connected work.
Right.
So you might schedule a week-long retreat to focus on a major project and then return to your regular schedule. Adam Grant, the Wharton professor and author, uses this approach, dedicating these blocks of time to deep thinking while still maintaining his teaching and speaking commitments.
That sounds a little more achievable, like switching back and forth between focus sprints and then those periods of collaboration or connection.
Yeah, exactly.
Then there's the rhythmic, which sounds like it's about kind of building that habit
Right.
and doing it on a consistent basis.
The rhythmic philosophy is all about incorporating deep work into your daily schedule on a regular basis. So this could be something like blocking off the same 2 hours every morning for focused work.
Yeah.
It's like building a muscle. The more you do it, the easier it becomes.
Right. Like anything, consistency is key.
Yeah.
And then finally, we have the journalistic, which sounds like it's a little bit more flexible, a little bit more adaptable.
Right. The journalistic philosophy is about seizing those pockets of time that open up unexpectedly, whether it's a free hour between meetings or a quiet evening at home.
Yeah.
Newport himself uses this approach, adapting to the demands of his teaching and writing schedule.
So it's about making the most of whatever time you have, even if it's not a perfect, uninterrupted block. What I find interesting is that each of these philosophies has its own advantages and drawbacks.
Right.
And it really depends on what kind of work you do, your personality, your lifestyle.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
The key is to find a philosophy that resonates with you and adapt it to your specific needs.
Yeah, I like that. It's about figuring out what works for you. So that's a great overview of the different philosophies, but let's get a little bit more practical here. What are some specific strategies that people can use, regardless of which philosophy they choose, to actually implement deep work in their lives?
Yeah, let's get into the tactics. Yeah, so let's talk about some of those strategies, and I think a good place to start is with this idea of ritualizing your deep work.
Ritualizing, okay.
So this is about creating a consistent routine that signals to your brain it's time to focus.
Okay.
This could involve working in the same location at the same time each day.
Yeah.
Following a specific pre-work routine,
Right.
like brewing a special kind of tea, listening to a particular playlist.
Oh, I like that.
Just creating these cues that help your mind kind of shift gears and transition into deep work mode.
Yeah, it's almost like a pre-game routine or something, before a big game.
Exactly. It helps you get in the zone.
Okay.
Another strategy that he suggests is to make what he calls grand gestures.
Grand gestures, okay. Now this sounds a little bit more dramatic.
It does sound a little dramatic. Think about J.K. Rowling checking into a luxurious hotel to finish writing the last Harry Potter book because she couldn't focus at home.
Right.
It was a way of signaling to herself, the importance of this task that deserved her full attention.
Yeah, it's like you're making this big commitment, this big statement.
Exactly.
That this is important.
It doesn't have to be, expensive or extravagant.
Right.
But the key is to find something that really signifies to you your commitment to the work.
Yeah. Like even just going to a library or a coffee shop or something, just to get out of your normal environment.
Right, exactly. A change in location, a change in mindset, something that shifts you out of your everyday routine.
So what about collaboration, though? Because I think there's this perception sometimes that deep work has to be this solitary activity.
Right.
But that's not always realistic, is it?
It's a common misconception that deep work is all about isolating yourself. It's really more about being intentional about how and when you collaborate.
Okay, so how do you do that?
Newport suggests this model he calls the hub and spoke. So your spoke is your dedicated space for deep work, where you can truly focus without interruption. And then you kind of venture out to the hub for those collaborative sessions, like brainstorming meetings or client calls.
Right.
It's about using collaboration strategically to actually fuel your deep work, not distract from it.
So it's not about like shunning all human contact, but it's about being very deliberate about when you are and aren't connecting with others.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And another interesting idea that he brings in is to execute like a business when it comes to deep work.
Execute like a business. Okay, that's interesting.
So he draws on this business framework called the 4 disciplines of execution,
Okay.
which is all about achieving wildly important goals.
Okay.
The first discipline is to focus on the wildly important. So identifying those top priorities,
Yeah.
then you act on lead measures. These are the activities that directly drive those goals.
Okay.
So in the context of deep work, this might be tracking your hours of focused work each week.
It's like you're taking those same principles of, being very clear on your goals, focusing on those key metrics, and you're applying it to this idea of personal productivity.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The third discipline is keeping a compelling scoreboard. So visually tracking your progress, making it tangible, making it motivating.
Yeah.
And finally, you create a cadence of accountability.
Okay.
So regularly reviewing your progress and making adjustments as needed.
Yeah, it's about building in those systems of accountability that I think often we don't do for ourselves, but we would do in a business context.
Exactly. We have those expectations for our businesses, our teams. We can apply that same rigor to our own work.
Okay, so we've got those systems in place, but what about downtime? Because I think there's this perception sometimes that, to be successful, to do deep work, we need to be always on, constantly grinding.
Right.
What does Newport say about that?
That is not at all what he advocates.
No?
In fact, he emphasizes that downtime is essential for deep work.
Okay, now that's interesting because it seems counterintuitive.
Right, because we're so used to this always-on mentality. But there's several reasons why downtime is so important. First, it allows your brain to rest and recharge.
Yeah.
Deep work is mentally taxing. Your brain, like any muscle, needs time to recover and rebuild.
Yeah, makes sense.
And second, downtime can actually enhance your deep work by allowing for this subconscious problem solving.
Yeah.
When you step away from a problem, your unconscious mind can continue to work on it in the background, often leading to those aha moments.
Right. Like sometimes you're wrestling with something and you just can't figure it out.
Right.
And then you go for a walk or you take a shower and suddenly the solution appeared.
Exactly.
Your brain needed that space.
It needs that space to process, to make connections that it can't make when it's constantly engaged in that focused thought.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, so stepping away can actually make us more productive.
Right.
What's the third reason for downtime?
Third reason is attention restoration.
Okay.
Constant exposure to stimuli, especially from our devices in the digital world, it leads to attention fatigue.
Right, like that feeling you get after hours of scrolling through social media or something.
Precisely. But when we spend time in nature, engage in activities that don't require focused attention, we give our attention a chance to recover, to reset.
Yeah, it's like hitting the reset button on your brain.
Exactly. Yeah. And this attention restoration is crucial for being able to engage in deep work effectively. When our attention is depleted, we're more easily distracted, we struggle to focus, and our cognitive performance suffers.
Yeah. Okay, I'm convinced. Downtime is officially non-negotiable. It's part of the plan.
Good.
But how do we deal with all those shallow tasks that inevitably kind of creep in and take over?
Yes, that's a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Those emails, those meetings, just those quick tasks that feel urgent but don't really move the needle on our larger goals.
Right.
How do we manage all of that?
That's where Newport's strategies for taming shallow work come in. It's about reclaiming your time and attention and ensuring that those shallow tasks don't kind of hijack your efforts.
This feels like a big one, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate to this.
Definitely.
So let's dive into those strategies for taming shallow work when we come back for part 3. Okay, so we're back, ready to tackle this whole shallow work problem. It's like this constant battle, right, between wanting to focus and then all these distractions popping up.
It really is. Those seemingly urgent but ultimately insignificant tasks.
Yeah.
It's so easy for them to take over.
Yeah, exactly. So how do we fight back? What are some of Newport's most effective strategies for minimizing that shallow work and reclaiming our time and attention?
Well, one of the most fundamental strategies is rigorously scheduling your day.
Hmm.
We touched on this earlier, but it's worth emphasizing. When you plan out your day in advance, allocating specific time blocks for both deep work and shallow work, you're less likely to get pulled in all these different directions.
Right. It's about being proactive rather than reactive. Like, this is what I'm doing, this is when I'm doing it, instead of just letting things happen to you.
Exactly. And I think another really powerful strategy is to really quantify your shallow work, to track how much time you're actually spending on those tasks.
I like that. It's like tracking your spending, you know? You might think you're not spending that much on takeout coffee, but then you actually look at your bank statement.
Exactly. And then you're like, oh, wow. Okay, I need to make some changes. It's the same thing with your time. When you see how much time is going to those seemingly small tasks, it's much easier to justify setting boundaries and prioritizing deep work.
Right, those little things add up.
Yep.
Okay, so scheduling, tracking, it's about bringing that kind of data-driven approach to our work. But what about those tasks that we can't completely eliminate, like email? How do we handle that constant influx of messages without letting it run our lives?
Email is a major culprit when it comes to shallow work, for sure. But Newport offers some pretty clever strategies for taming the email beast. One that he emphasizes is implementing sender filters.
Sender filters, okay. What are those exactly?
So it's basically about setting up rules in your email program that automatically sort your messages based on the sender or subject. So you're not constantly being bombarded by unimportant emails. You can focus on the ones that truly require your attention.
So it's like creating a system that prioritizes what's most important and pushes all the noise to the side?
Precisely. And Newport himself actually uses a really strict filter. He requires people to, jump through all these hoops before they can even reach his main inbox. And he mentions a consultant, Clay Herbert, who does something similar, requiring potential clients to read an FAQ and fill out a detailed survey before they can even email him.
Wow, that's commitment. But I get it. It's about protecting your time and not getting bogged down in all that back and forth.
Absolutely. And sometimes I think the most effective way to manage email is to simply not respond.
Wait, really? Just ignore those unread messages. I mean, that feels almost radical in today's world.
Well, within reason, of course.
Yeah.
But Newport points out that a lot of successful professionals, they have this no response policy for emails that don't meet certain criteria.
Okay, so what are those criteria? When is it okay to just let that message sit there unanswered?
So if the email's ambiguous or not really relevant to your work, or if nothing significant would happen if you just didn't respond.
So basically, those emails that don't really require action or attention?
Exactly. It's about
Okay.
recognizing that you don't have to respond to every single message that lands in your inbox, and that sometimes silence is the best reply.
Okay, that's empowering, like giving yourself permission to just, step away from the constant communication stream. And speaking of opting out, let's talk about the biggest attention suck of them all, social media.
Ah, yes. Social media, the ultimate shallow work rabbit hole.
Right, like, oh, I'll just check this notification and then suddenly an hour's gone. So what does Newport say about this? Does he think we all need to go cold turkey and delete all our accounts?
He doesn't necessarily say that. He actually suggests a 30-day social media packing party.
Packing party. Now that sounds kind of fun, actually. More fun than just deleting everything.
It's inspired by the minimalist packing party, where you pack up all of your belongings as if you're moving, and you only unpack what you actually end up using or missing.
Right, so it's like an experiment. You're stepping away from social media for a set period of time, not necessarily forever, but just to see what happens.
Right, and to see if you actually miss it. Because what often happens is you realize that you're not really missing anything important.
It's like the world doesn't end when you stop posting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what you gain in return is so much more valuable. It's time, it's mental space, it's freedom from those constant notifications and comparisons.
I can see that. So it's not about demonizing social media, it's about being more intentional with it. Okay, I'm putting that on my to-do list. Social media packing party. But what about those times when we're not working, when we're supposed to be relaxing? Does Newport have any suggestions for how we can best utilize that downtime?
He does. He actually suggests structuring your leisure time.
Structured leisure time. Isn't that kind of a contradiction? Like, shouldn't leisure be about just relaxing and doing whatever you want?
It might seem counterintuitive, but Newport argues that unstructured leisure can be really draining. He draws on the ideas of this writer, Arnold Bennett, who believed we should treat our free time as a day within a day.
So approaching it with the same kind of intentionality that we bring to our work.
Exactly. Bennett believed that instead of just zoning out in front of the TV, we should engage in activities that stimulate our minds and bring us joy. Things like reading, learning a new skill, spending time with loved ones, pursuing hobbies.
So it's about being more mindful of how we're spending our time, even when we're not working.
Precisely. And one way to create that structure is to set a strict end time for your workday. This is something that Newport calls fixed schedule productivity.
So no matter what, you stop working at a certain time, even if you haven't finished everything on your to-do list.
Right. The goal is to create a clear separation between work time and leisure time, so you can fully detach and recharge. He uses the example of Jason Fried, the founder of Basecamp, who implemented a 4-day work week during the summer months.
I remember reading about that. It seemed like such a radical idea at the time.
What's interesting is that Fried actually encouraged his employees to use that extra day for deep work, for exploring new ideas, for working on side projects. It wasn't just about taking more time off, it was about being more productive and creative.
So it's like by setting those boundaries and creating that space for deep work, you actually end up achieving more.
Exactly. It's about working smarter, not harder, and recognizing that our brains need time to rest and recharge in order to function at their best.
I love that. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Strategies for scheduling, taming shallow work, even structuring our leisure time. It seems like the overarching theme is really about taking back control of our time and attention.
Absolutely. It's about becoming the master of your own mind, not a slave to distraction.
Yes, master of your mind, not a slave to distraction. That should be on a t-shirt.
I would wear that. But speaking of mastering our minds, there's one more piece of the puzzle that we haven't touched on yet. Actively training our minds for deep work.
Right, because it's not enough to just, manage our time and minimize distractions. We also have to build those mental muscles, that capacity for focus. So how do we actually train our minds for deep work?
Newport suggests a few different techniques. One that might sound kind of counterintuitive is productive meditation.
Productive meditation, so not the kind where you're sitting on a cushion trying to empty your mind.
Not quite. Newport actually uses walking, running, or other forms of physical activity for his productive meditation sessions.
Interesting. So it's more like active contemplation.
Exactly. The idea is to use that time to focus your attention on a specific problem or idea that you're working on.
So it's like turning your daily walk or run into a brainstorming session.
Precisely. And because you're not sitting at your desk, you're less likely to get distracted by other tasks or notifications.
That makes sense. And what about that other technique he mentions, the one about memorizing a deck of cards? That seems more like a party trick than a deep work strategy.
It might sound strange, but there's actually some solid research that suggests that memory training can really improve concentration.
Okay, so how does memorizing a deck of cards actually help with deep work?
Well, the process of memorizing something like that requires intense focus and attention to detail. You're creating these vivid mental images and linking them together in a specific order. It's basically like a workout for your concentration muscles.
Right, like cross-training for your brain. You're building those mental muscles that you can then apply to other tasks that require deep focus.
Exactly. And these training techniques, they don't just improve your ability to focus during those specific sessions, they actually have a carryover effect into other areas of your life.
So the more you practice focusing, the better you get at focusing in general.
That's the idea. But there's a catch. Newport emphasizes that you can't just train your mind for deep work in isolation. You also need to minimize distractions outside those dedicated sessions.
Right. It's about creating a lifestyle that supports deep work.
Exactly. If you're constantly bombarding your brain with stimulation, checking your phone every 5 minutes, watching TV while you eat dinner, scrolling through social media before bed, you're essentially undoing all the hard work you're putting in during your deep work sessions.
So it's about being mindful of our attention even when we're not working.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that your attention is a valuable resource that needs to be protected, not squandered.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. The importance of deep work, different philosophies for incorporating it into our lives, strategies for taming shallow work, and even techniques for training our minds for deeper focus. It's been a fascinating exploration.
It has been. And I think the most important takeaway is that deep work is so much more than just a productivity hack. It's a way of life. It's about making a conscious choice to focus on what truly matters,
Right.
to create things of value, to do work that you're proud of.
It's about being present, intentional, and fully engaged in whatever you're doing, whether it's writing a book, building a business, or even just having a meaningful conversation with a friend.
It's about reclaiming our time, our attention, and ultimately our minds. And I think in a world that's constantly trying to distract us and pull us in 1,000 different directions, that's a revolutionary act.
Well said. So, to our listeners, I encourage you to take what you've learned from this deep dive and start experimenting. Find a deep work philosophy that resonates with you, implement those strategies for minimizing shallow work, and embrace the challenge of training your mind for deeper focus.
And remember, deep work is a journey, not a destination. It's about continuously striving to do your best work, create things of value, and live a life that feels both productive and meaningful.
It's about living a deep life.